The warp never sleeps. Its tides ripple across the void, unseen yet felt in every tremor of reality. On the edge of the Imperium, where starlight dares not linger and void ships vanish without trace, there exist worlds that are no longer governed by the laws of flesh and machine. Here the air tastes of brimstone, and the sky bleeds colors that should not exist. Shadows twist against themselves, and the whispers of the warp crawl into the minds of the living, promising power, torment, and the unraveling of the soul. In these places, reality is a cruel illusion, a fragile veil ripped apart by the whims of entities older than Terra itself. Few return from such worlds, and those who do speak only in fractured prayers or screams. This is the realm where the Emperor's light struggles to penetrate, and where mortals are but prey for forces that see flesh and bone as nothing more than toys. If you dare to witness the horror that lurks beyond the Astronomican's gaze, join this journey, share this vision, immerse yourself fully, and let the grim darkness of the 41st millennium seep into your senses. Like, subscribe, and remain vigilant, for what you are about to witness is not easily forgotten. The void screamed as the drop pod pierced the upper atmosphere, molten metal and scorching air clawing at its hull. Inside, Sergeant Kyle's lungs burned from recycled air that smelled faintly of ozone and old oil. Around him, the squad shifted uneasily, each man acutely aware of the weight pressing upon their hearts. The warp was restless tonight, the Astronomican's distant light offering little comfort as they descended toward a world that did not want them. As the pod breached the clouds, the surface revealed itself in grotesque relief. Jagged mountains that glowed like smoldering coals, rivers of promethium that hissed and boiled, and skies painted in sickly greens and purples that churned like living flesh. The sensors flickered, unable to reconcile physical laws with the aberrant readings. Kale felt a prickling in his skull, a premonition whispered by some unseen intelligence. He tightened his grip on his laser gun, the metal cold and familiar in his hands, a small anchor in the maelstrom. The pod slammed onto the surface, the impact reverberating through every bone in Kyle's body. He opened the hatch into a heat that was almost liquid, thick with the smell of burning stone and a strange cloying sweetness that made his stomach twist. The ground underfoot was unstable, shifting like sand over molten rock. The squad exited, boots crunching against crusted ash, and the silence was absolute, oppressive, until a distant roar shattered it, a sound that belonged neither to man nor machine. Kale's heart raced. He had read the reports, memorized the warnings, but nothing in the Administratum's dry data could have prepared him for this. The first hours were a battle against the environment itself. Gravity warped unpredictably in pockets, dragging men sideways, bending light into impossible angles that made the horizon appear to move. Heat shimmered off the cracked landscape, and occasional eruptions of promethium flared like miniature suns, forcing the squad to scramble for cover behind fractured spires of blackened stone. Kale's Vox grill hissed with static as he tried to maintain contact with the pod above, only to receive fragmented signals, screams, bursts of interference, and then nothing. Communication itself seemed devoured by the planet. Every step was an ordeal. Ash coated every surface, filling lungs, sticking to armor, and mixing with the unearthly heat to create a sense of suffocation. Shadows moved unnaturally, folding back upon themselves as though reality were recoiling from their presence. Kale's squad, seasoned veterans of the 7th Cadian Shock Regiment, relied on discipline, yet even their practiced eyes could not distinguish between rock and some living menace that slithered or waited unseen. One of the newer recruits, Private Hallow, faltered, staring at a fissure that shimmered with an eerie inner light, muttering prayers to the Emperor that came out in ragged gasps. As night, or what passed for it beneath the warped sky, descended, the air itself seemed to thicken, carrying voices that were almost human, whispers threaded with malice. Kale felt the subtle tug of the warp upon his mind, a chill that seeped through the skull and settled like frost along the spine. He tightened his grip on the power sword slung at his hip, though he knew it could not protect them from everything this world might throw at them. Above, distant lightning split the sky in impossible arcs, illuminating forms that were half shadow, half creature, dancing at the periphery of vision. Each flicker was enough to make a man question what was solid, what was alive, and whether he himself remained fully human. A low rumble began beneath their boots, subtle at first, almost indistinguishable from the tremors of the shifting ground. Then it grew, rolling through the mountains and valleys like some immense unseen beast stirring from eons of slumber. Kyle barked orders, trying to maintain the thin veneer of command, but instinct told him the world was watching, judging, and preparing to strike. When the first eruption of molten promethium surged across the landscape, consuming the distant spire where they had planned to establish a forward camp, it became clear that survival would not be measured by courage alone. Every decision, every movement could be the difference between life and death, or something far worse. Cale knelt, pressing a gloved hand to the scorched soil, feeling the vibration, the pulse of the world itself. He did not speak. The wind carried sounds that were not winds. The air carried omens. Around him, the squad waited, each man a tense silhouette against the glowing chaos. And Cale wondered if they had already crossed the line from soldiers into prey. He could hear the distant roar again, closer now, a sound that promised pain without mercy, a reminder that no strategy, no weapon, no prayer could fully shield them from what awaited. And yet, despite the terror, despite the oppressive weight of impossible reality, they moved forward, because to halt was to die. And to die here was not just death, but the beginning of an unending nightmare. The ground trembled beneath their boots, each step a negotiation with the world itself. Cale led the squad over cracked obsidian ridges, the heat radiating in waves that distorted the air and made the horizon ripple like molten glass. The once familiar laws of physics seemed optional here. Gravity tugged unpredictably, shadows bent in ways that defied logic, and the wind carried echoes that mimicked voices from the past, whispering secrets that no sane mind could endure. Every inhale was heavy with ash, acrid smoke, and the faintly sweet stench of corruption. Private Hallow stumbled again, this time into a shallow fissure that glowed faintly with an unnatural light. Cale grabbed his arm, hauling him back onto solid rock. "Eyes open," he barked, his voice steady even as his gut nodded. "Do not look away. Do not think." Hallow's wide, panicked eyes reflected the fractured sky, and Cale saw the beginnings of madness forming like ice along the edges of his comrade's mind. The squad pressed on, each man carrying the weight of fear and discipline, moving in patterns drilled into them over years of service, though the landscape offered no comfort, no predictability, only peril. They encountered the first signs of previous expeditions, charred skeletal remains, scorched weapons, and shattered vox slates that sputtered fragmented data. The static-laden messages hinted at horrors that Kyle refused to vocalize, as if speaking them aloud might summon them. He scowled at a fragment of an administratum record, the glyphs twisted and scorched beyond recognition. The warp had a way of consuming history here, turning fact into nightmare, erasing clarity, leaving only terror. He pressed forward anyway, the need for survival overriding instinct, though a small voice in his head whispered that survival here might not even be possible. As they climbed toward a plateau, the temperature dropped abruptly, a shock that seemed unnatural in a world defined by fire. Mist rose from fissures in the rock, curling like living smoke, carrying a faint hum that vibrated in the skull. Cale stopped, signaling for the squad to halt. The sound was not random. It had rhythm, purpose, and intent. It was the world itself, or what had claimed it, acknowledging their presence. The soldiers strained against the oppressive atmosphere, each one sensing the invisible eyes that followed them, the intelligence lurking just beyond the perception of flesh. Even the most stoic veterans were reduced to whispers and nervous glances, a stark reminder that fear was currency here. Then movement appeared in the haze, silhouettes that seemed human, yet wrong. Limbs elongated at impossible angles, eyes gleaming with unnatural light. Cale raised his laser gun, heart hammering, and fired a disciplined volley. The figures dissipated into smoke and shadow before the beams could touch them, reforming a step farther ahead, mocking in their persistence. Every encounter tested the limits of comprehension. This was no conventional battlefield, no enemy that could be reasoned with or outmaneuvered. Each apparition, each whisper, each distortion of gravity and time, chipped away at the soldiers' sanity, forcing them to confront truths that mortals were not meant to know. Night, or its semblance, crept across the jagged terrain, bringing with it a darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Cale ordered the squad to establish a temporary perimeter near a spire of blackened rock. They set up minimal defenses, the effort feeling almost ceremonial in a place where conventional warfare was irrelevant. Around the camp, the air quivered, alive with subtle vibrations that spoke of hidden predators and even more insidious forces. Cale could hear the soft hiss of promethium streams nearby, the bubbling of molten rivers, and the distant groan of the terrain itself, as if the world flexed its muscles in preparation for a hunt. Cale found a brief, hollow solace in checking the squad's injuries and equipment. noting abrasions, smoke burns, and fraying nerves. The men were alive, but survival here was fragile, like trying to hold water in a cupped hand. Above them, the sky pulsed and twisted with unnatural storms, arcs of light painting impossible shadows over the landscape. The whispers persisted, unrelenting, threading through the minds of those who tried to sleep. Kyle lay awake on scorched stone, staring at the sky and praying, not aloud but in the private chambers of his mind, that the Emperor might witness this, might intervene. He knew the chance was slim, that the Astronomican's light barely reached this far, and yet he hoped because hope was a weapon, however brittle, against despair. As the first glimmers of a warped dawn began to stain the horizon, the ground trembled more violently. Kale sensed the approach of something immense, its weight and presence unmistakable even through the fractured perception of the warp. Shadows twisted along the mountainside, shaping into forms that suggested intelligence and malevolence. He gritted his teeth, signaling the squad to readiness. Every soldier, weapon raised, held their breath, waiting for the inevitable clash that would test the limits of flesh, will, and faith. The descent into fire was far from over. It was only beginning, and the world seemed eager to remind them of its dominion. The tremor surged into a roar as something massive moved beneath the ground, shaking loose fragments of rock and ash that rained over the squad. Kale barked orders, voice hoarse but steady, and the soldiers scattered behind fractured spires, every movement calculated yet desperate. The very air seemed to pulse, vibrating with a force that was neither wind nor quake, but something older, alive, and aware. Kale's instinct screamed that this was no ordinary predator. This was the world itself, awakened, testing their resolve. Through the heat haze, shapes emerged, monstrous silhouettes, flickering with energy that was neither fire nor lightning. Some resembled the twisted forms of men, yet with elongated limbs and faces carved in perpetual agony. Others defied classification, a writhing mass of appendages and eyes that reflected every fear the squad had ever carried. Kale's lasgun fired in disciplined bursts, the beams searing through the air, but the creatures absorbed or evaded every shot. The warping gravity, the smoke, the twisted light, all conspired to make every aim uncertain, every action a gamble with death. Private Hollow screamed as something brushed past him, a shape that seemed to crawl along the edge of his perception before dissolving into the smoke. Kale dragged him back behind cover, forcing the trembling soldier to focus, eyes forward. "Don't let it drag you into its mind," Kale ordered, voice sharp, almost unnatural in its authority. Around them, the rest of the squad engaged in a desperate dance of fire and maneuver, each encounter leaving its mark, scorched armor, ragged breaths, and the creeping sense that the world's laws were dissolving. The line between hunter and hunted had blurred beyond recognition. Amidst the chaos, Kale glimpsed a fissure splitting the earth like a wound, glowing from deep within with molten energy that pulsed in rhythm with the tremors. It drew his attention, magnetic and horrifying, as if some intelligence beneath the surface was summoning them, daring them to approach. He signaled for caution, understanding instinctively that curiosity here was a dangerous luxury, yet survival demanded movement, not inaction. The squad advanced, each step a negotiation with fear, each breath a defiance of despair. They were alive, and yet the world tested them at every heartbeat, every glance, every hesitation. The sun, or the semblance of it, rose higher, casting the warped landscape in hues of green and violet. Shadows stretched like tendrils crawling across rock and ash, while distant eruptions of promethium flared like miniature suns, reshaping the terrain in seconds. Kale scanned the horizon and saw the signs of old battles, burned-out vehicles, shattered fortifications, and scorched data slates that flickered with fragmented images. The world was a graveyard of those who had come before, a warning written in fire and ruin. The realization struck him that they were not the first, and they would likely not be the last. Survival depended not on bravery alone, but on understanding the rules of a world that refused to obey any. By midday, exhaustion had begun to sap their strength. Breathing came in ragged gasps, muscles screamed in protest, and yet they pressed forward, driven by duty, training, and the faint, stubborn ember of hope. Kyle felt the pull of the warp more strongly now, subtle but insistent, tugging at the edges of his mind. Every soldier experienced flickers of doubt, illusions of movement in the corners of their eyes, voices that mimicked comrades or whispered betrayal. Here even faith was tested, as the Emperor's light seemed distant, muted, and filtered through a haze that threatened to corrupt understanding itself. The day ended with the squad reaching a plateau that overlooked a river of molten promethium, its surface roiling like a living thing. Kale surveyed the scene, noting the precarious positions, the exhaustion in every soldier's stance, and the lurking threats that still moved in the haze. Here they would make camp, but safety was an illusion. The whispers continued, the tremors persisted, and the shadows stretched endlessly. The world had claimed their attention and would not release it. Kale knelt beside the glowing river, feeling its heat through his gloves, and realized that the descent into fire was not just a journey across terrain. It was a trial of spirit, a crucible of mind and body, and the opening act of a nightmare that had only just begun. As night approached again, warped and twisted, Kale's squad huddled together, weapons ready, senses sharpened. The screams in the distance were faint, almost lost in the hum of the planet, yet unmistakable. Somewhere out there, something moved with purpose, and it was only a matter of time before the hunters became the hunted. Kale stared into the darkening horizon, feeling the pulse of the world beneath him, and whispered a silent prayer. In this place, survival was not a certainty, it was a defiance, and every heartbeat was a victory over the unending nightmare. The plateau offered a fragile sense of security, yet it was illusory. Even as the squad rested, the air hummed with a resonance that seemed to belong neither to the atmosphere nor the world itself. Shadows drifted across the jagged rocks, coalescing into fleeting shapes that vanished when confronted, leaving only a lingering sense of watching eyes. Kale adjusted his armor and scanned the horizon, sensing that the nightmare they had glimpsed yesterday was only the beginning. What had come before them, previous expeditions, lost regiments, forgotten psychers, left traces not in records or maps, but in the echoes of terror that reverberated through every fissure and canyon. The first discovery came at the edge of the plateau, where the earth had split into a yawning chasm, exposing layers of ash and molten stone. Within, skeletal remains were scattered with grim precision, some fused unnaturally to the blackened rock, others holding scorched data slates that sputtered fragmented messages. Kale knelt beside one, brushing ash from a charred vox grill. The garbled voices that emerged were layered in static and panic, recounting brief, fragmented glimpses of demonic assaults, betrayal among comrades, and the slow, unbearable pressure of the world itself. Every syllable carried a weight of despair that threatened to pierce the mind like shards of glass. Private Hallow shivered beside him, eyes wide and unfocused. "Sergeant, they're singing," he whispered, voice trembling. Kale followed his gaze and saw the phenomenon. The wind, or something in it, whistled through fissures in the rock, producing tones that echoed eerily like a choir, yet warped, unnatural, and laced with malevolence. The sound seeped into their minds, twisting thoughts, igniting half-formed fears, and conjuring visions of comrades long dead. Kale's teeth clenched. Even for a veteran of countless campaigns, this auditory distortion was intolerable. He forced his mind back into discipline, guiding the squad away from the edge. Every step a battle against perception itself. Further exploration revealed relics of human endeavor, scorched equipment, melted armor, and fragments of psycher-focused crystals, shattered and scattered. The signs were unmistakable. Those who had come before had fought with valor, yet the world, and whatever intelligence resided within it, had consumed them. Kale's mind drew an involuntary comparison between their current situation and the fragments of previous expeditions. Survival here was as much about resisting despair as it was about physical endurance. Every decision, every movement risked inviting madness, and the squad's cohesion was the only shield against the creeping corruption of perception. The psychic resonance of the choir intensified as they moved deeper into the chasm, threading through tunnels and fractured stone like a living thing. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, folding over themselves, and Kyle noted shapes that seemed to anticipate their motions, vanishing only when approached directly. His voice echoed in harsh whispers over the vox grill, attempting to coordinate movements, but interference from the warp distorted both signals and perception. Time itself felt unsteady. Moments stretched and collapsed, disorienting the soldiers, making every step both essential and perilous. By midday, the squad reached what remained of a ruined outpost, its walls twisted and scorched beyond recognition. The architecture bore no logic of Imperial design, yet fragments of human construction remained. Barricades, melted lasgun racks, scorched markings indicating units that had vanished. Kale examined the ruins cautiously. Every corner, every shadow seemed to carry memories of suffering and failure. as if the stones themselves remembered the anguish of those who had fallen. The broken choir, as Hallow had called it, was no simple haunting. It was a warning, a psychological trap designed to strip the mind of certainty, leaving only fear and hesitation. Cale forced his thoughts back to command, noting the subtle signs of fatigue in his squad, trembling hands, haunted eyes, and hesitation that could prove fatal. They had endured physical trials, yet the psychic weight of the environment proved a more insidious adversary. The world did not merely attack the flesh, it sought to claim the mind, turning memories into nightmares, trust into suspicion. The specter of lost comrades haunted every corner, and Kyle realized that even a single misstep could fracture the squad irreparably. They were no longer just soldiers. They were vessels of human will, standing against forces that sought to dissolve the concept of humanity itself. The broken choir rose around them as the sun, or its twisted approximation, dipped toward the horizon. Resonant winds threaded through the ruins, producing notes that were simultaneously beautiful and horrifying, a lullaby of despair for those who dared listen. Cale ordered the squad to hold formation, weapons ready, senses honed to every flicker of shadow. This was no longer a fight of survival alone. It was a battle to maintain reality itself, to resist the encroaching madness that promised to claim them as it had so many before. They were alive, yes, but only barely. And the echoes of the choir reminded them of the fragility of that life, of the cost that each heartbeat demanded in a world that had forgotten mercy. The air thickened as they ventured deeper into the ruins, carrying with it a stench that was neither decay nor fire, but something indescribably corrupt, clinging to armor and lungs alike. Shadows shifted independently of any source, and every step forward was met with a subtle but unmistakable resistance, as if the world itself were aware of their intrusion. Cale's squad moved in tense silence, each soldier acutely aware that the slightest lapse could invite the chorus of whispers and distortions to consume them entirely. He gripped his power sword, its cold hilt a reminder of the tangible in a place where perception betrayed every instinct. They found remnants of Psyker's paraphernalia scattered across the stone, crystals shattered and etched with sigils of protection, now meaningless against the warp's will. Cale knelt to inspect one of the fragments, its edges scorched, and felt a fleeting pulse, a whisper of residual thought trapped within the fractured crystal. It spoke of terror and pleading, of visions too vast and impossible to commit to memory, and Cale realized that the Psykers who had once held this world at bay had been devoured slowly, not by claws or fire but by knowledge too expansive for mortal minds to endure. Even now, echoes of their suffering laced the very air with unease. Private Hallow's muttering grew louder, as if the whispers had taken residence in his mind. He pointed toward a shattered wall, where twisted shadows seemed to reassemble into fleeting forms of soldiers, some from his own memories, others imagined, all grotesque in distortion. Cale forced him down, pressing a hand to the young man's shoulder. "Do not engage with them. They are illusions, nothing more." But even as he spoke, Cale's own vision flickered. The shadows taunted him, reflecting failures and decisions from campaigns long past, twisting them into curses and damnation. The broken choir was no longer a phenomenon outside themselves. It was inside them, insinuating doubt, fear, and despair. The squad pressed onward, moving toward a cavern that pulsed with faint green luminescence, the floor slick with molten residue. As they entered, the whispering became a chorus, layered and insistent, harmonizing in voices that belonged to neither living nor dead. Each soldier struggled to maintain focus, and Cale felt the edge of his own mind fraying at the corners. Even so, he forced each step, relying on discipline and the shared determination of the squad. Survival was the only reality they could trust, and even that was tenuous at best. Within the cavern, remnants of the lost expeditions were more abundant: scorched banners, shattered lasguns fused into the stone, and fragments of armor that seemed to twitch as though recalling gestures of their long-dead wearers. The chorus shifted with each movement, as if the world itself composed the music in response to their actions. Cale could not tell whether it was a warning or a mockery, whether the voices carried memory or malevolence. He barked orders to map the chamber to take stock. But even the simplest task became an ordeal as hallucinations assaulted each man differently, twisting comrades into enemies, reality into nightmare. By evening, the soldiers were physically intact but mentally battered. The broken choir had revealed itself as a predator that could not be fought with firepower, tactics, or steel. Kyle gathered the squad in a circle, speaking quietly, emphasizing discipline, coordination, and the importance of shared perception. The warp's influence was palpable, pressing against thoughts, and even minor disagreements risked fracturing the fragile cohesion they had left. Every sound, every flicker of light, every whispered note of the spectral choir reminded them that the line between life and madness was dangerously thin. Cale realized the full weight of their situation. Survival here demanded more than courage or strength. It demanded the ability to recognize illusion, to anchor the mind when every instinct screamed surrender. The broken choir was not just an auditory assault. It was a lesson in the fragility of humanity, in the limits of perception, in the subtle ways a demon world could consume hope and replace it with despair. Around them, the ruins seemed to pulse in rhythm with the whispers, and Cale understood that the true horror of this place was not merely the creatures or the environment, but the slow erosion of the soul. The world remembered every failure, every act of weakness, and sang it back in unending, haunting harmonics. As the distorted night fell, green luminescence from the cavern casting elongated shadows, Cale stood surveying the squad. Their eyes were haunted but focused, weapons ready. Survival here would not be measured in victories or kills, but in the ability to remain unbroken, to withstand the unceasing pressure of a world that had claimed countless lives before them. The broken choir would continue, ever patient, ever insidious, but they were still alive. And in a place where life was fleeting and terror absolute, that was itself an achievement, a fragile, fleeting victory against a world that existed only to devour. The air in the cavern thickened as the night stretched onward, the chorus of whispers forming a tapestry of sound that pressed against the mind. Cale felt the subtle tug of the warp growing stronger, a faint vibration along the nerves that was more felt than heard. It was as if the world itself was aware of their thoughts, listening, teasing, and testing. Each soldier moved with cautious precision, their senses taut, scanning shadows that shifted just beyond the edge of reason. Even the seasoned veterans felt the weight of the unseen eyes, and Cale knew that discipline alone could not shield them from the insidious influence of the broken choir. Deeper within the ruins, they discovered evidence of ritual, strange arrangements of charred stone, melted metals, and fragments of sacred texts burned into shapes too precise to be accidental. Cale knelt beside a scorched fragment, tracing a finger over a symbol resembling the imperial aquila, warped and twisted by flame and time. The meaning was obscured, lost to the corruption of the warp, yet he sensed intent. This was not a battlefield but a cathedral of despair, a place where those who had come before had offered their minds and bodies as tribute to forces that did not forgive, did not forget. The choir song rose and fell with a cadence that mirrored the twisted sigils, each note a reminder that human effort here was meaningless against the will of the demon world. Private Hallow's murmurs became louder, almost conversational with the voices, and Cale gripped his shoulder firmly. Focus. Anchor yourself in what you know, not what they whisper. Hallow's eyes flicked toward him, wide with fear yet tethered by Cale's authority. Around them, the squad navigated tunnels where shadows clung like smoke, flickering with faces that belonged to comrades, ancestors, and strangers alike. Each apparition was both guide and predator, a fragment of memory twisted into mockery. Cale realized that survival was no longer measured by distance or firepower, but by mental fortitude, by the ability to maintain a grip on a reality that constantly dissolved beneath them. They moved carefully, their boots crunching over ash and brittle stone, until they reached a chamber where the whispers intensified into a cacophony, a symphony of sorrow, rage, and madness. Here, the broken choir revealed its full potency. Soldiers from previous expeditions, eyes hollow and accusing, mouths moving in silent screams. Cale raised his lasgun, firing not at the apparitions themselves. He knew they could not be harmed, but to assert presence, to remind his mind and the minds of his squad that they were still flesh, still alive, and still capable of action. The chamber seemed endless, folding back on itself in impossible ways, walls stretching and compressing as if breathing. Cale's thoughts raced, anchored by duty and training, yet challenged by every sensory assault. The choir's song, once faint, now resonated in the bones, harmonizing with the rhythm of their own heartbeat, making every step feel like a negotiation with the world itself. He could feel the pull of despair, the temptation to succumb, to see the shadows as reality, to surrender to the inevitable. But he forced himself onward, guiding the squad through twisting passages, every word, every gesture a tether to sanity. Finally, they emerged into a smaller cavern, less ornate, quieter, where the oppressive weight seemed to lift slightly, though the echoes of the broken choir persisted. A distant undertone rather than a dominating presence. Cale took a breath, surveying his squad. Hallow pale and trembling, others silent but watchful, eyes reflecting relief, exhaustion, and the faintest glimmer of defiance. This brief reprieve was a testament not to luck, but to will, discipline, and the fragile cohesion that bound them together. They had survived the choir's first onslaught, endured the psychic maelstrom, and reached a point where the world's influence could be observed without immediate obliteration of the mind. Cale knew the relief was temporary. The broken choir was patient, endless, an eternal predator waiting for weakness to surface. But in this pause, he allowed himself a measure of reflection. The world had already claimed many lives, broken many minds, yet they had resisted. The squad had not yet succumbed. Even in a place designed to erase hope, even in a chamber built from the echoes of suffering and madness, humanity persisted. And Cale, though weary, understood that survival here demanded more than firepower or strategy. It demanded resilience, faith, and the unwavering refusal to let the mind be consumed. As the warped night pressed against the edges of the cavern, Cale set watch rotations, the laser guns casting eerie shadows on the walls. The broken choir whispered on, a haunting, omnipresent symphony, but the squad remained vigilant. They had glimpsed the consequences of failure, understood the malice of the world, and yet despite every torment, they endured. And in that endurance, fragile though it might be, they carved the first victory against the nightmare, a small foothold in a world that seemed intent on erasing all traces of human existence. The first light, or its warped semblance, spilled across the jagged horizon, but it offered no comfort. Shadows remained thick and mobile, curling like living smoke over the broken landscape. Cale led the squad down from the cavern, the heat of molten fissures pressing against their boots, while the whispers of the broken choir faded only enough to allow clear thought. Here, the horrors were no longer distant echoes or hallucinations. They were physical, tangible, and predatory. Shapes moved between the twisted rocks, their forms sometimes resembling the familiar orc silhouettes. Corrupted beasts, but each distorted, unnatural, as if filtered through the whim of the warp itself. A sudden screech split the air, a sound too loud and guttural for any human throat. Cale raised his laser gun instinctively, but the shadowed figure had already vanished, leaving only scorched footprints in the brittle stone. Every muscle in his body tensed, instincts honed through years of combat kicking in, yet he felt the subtle unease that this was no ordinary engagement. The predators here were not bound by predictable patterns. Their awareness was uncanny, attuned to fear, hesitation, and even the slightest flicker of doubt. They were hunters perfected by a world that had no use for mercy. Private Hallow stumbled over a jagged outcrop, yelping as something brushed against him. Coyle grabbed him, yanking him back into formation, the heat of the creature's proximity palpable even without sight. The squad moved as one, weapons raised, each man scanning the shifting shadows with calculated precision, every step deliberate. The predators were clever, probing, testing, and Cale understood that hesitation here was death. Even minor mistakes could be fatal, for these creatures were extensions of the world's will, and the warp amplified their instincts beyond natural limits. The first tangible contact came in the form of a corrupted hound, its body elongated and fused with jagged stone, eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. It lunged from a fissure, moving with impossible speed. Laser gun fire met it mid-leap, searing its flesh and tearing through warped musculature, yet it did not collapse. It landed, shaking free molten fragments and snarling, each breath a hiss of brimstone-scented smoke. Cale moved forward, power sword extended, striking with precision honed through countless engagements. The blade met resistance, as though cutting through both flesh and some unseen force that animated it. Hallow fired at close range, the last round striking true, but the hound's resilience was unnerving. The squad realized instantly, these were no ordinary creatures. They were born of the warp, flesh sculpted by nightmare, and adaptive in ways that defied strategy. As they pressed onward, a group of twisted orc forms emerged, hulking, scarred, yet infused with an unnatural, lithe grace that made each step unpredictable. Their crude weaponry glowed faintly with energy that pulsed in rhythm with the landscape itself. Kyle ordered disciplined fire, laser gun beams carving streaks through the warped morning air. Some orcs fell, screaming in defiance and rage, yet the remainder pressed forward with a calculated, almost intelligent persistence that suggested a fusion of instinct and some malevolent guidance. Each encounter strained the squad, testing not only marksmanship and tactics but endurance, patience, and the ability to maintain cohesion under a relentless, unpredictable assault. The terrain itself became a weapon. Fissures splitting suddenly, molten rivers redirecting, and gravity bending in subtle, disorienting shifts. Kale barked orders, adjusting formations in real time, his mind a tempest of calculation and adrenaline. The squad moved through a gauntlet of predatory forms, each encounter leaving scorched ground, shattered armor, and the lingering stench of brimstone and corrupted flesh. Even as their weapons fired, the world seemed to respond, anticipating movements, exploiting hesitation, and turning the environment into a co-conspirator of death. By midday, exhaustion and heat had begun to weigh heavily on the soldiers. Sweat mingled with ash, armor burned their skin, and the psychological strain of facing predators that defied logic gnawed at every mind. Kale recognized the subtle signs: tremors in hands, flickers of doubt in eyes, the almost imperceptible slowing of reactions. Survival depended on awareness, coordination, and sheer mental fortitude. Every encounter reinforced a grim truth. The predators were extensions of the demon world itself, intelligent, relentless, and tuned to exploit the smallest lapse. The squad had not just to fight, they had to endure, adapt, and anticipate the impossible. Through the haze of heat and warped air, Kyle observed a distant spire, partially destroyed, yet still standing as a landmark. Its presence offered a potential refuge, a tactical anchor in a landscape designed to devour. He signaled the squad forward, knowing that every step would be contested by shadows, beasts, and the unpredictable whims of a world alive with malice. The predators of flesh were only the beginning. Survival demanded both courage and a willingness to confront nightmares manifested from the warp itself. The spire loomed closer, blackened and jagged, but offering the illusion of safety amidst the chaos. Kale led the squad carefully, each step measured, boots crunching against brittle rock and ash, shadows twisted unnaturally around them, bending as if to observe, to anticipate, to challenge. The predators were patient hunters, stalking not in blind rage but with cunning, weaving through the warped terrain with an intelligence that unnerved even the most seasoned soldiers. Every creak of rock, every hiss of wind, carried the promise of attack, forcing Kale and his squad into a heightened state of awareness that taxed mind and body alike. They encountered a creature that defied categorization, a massive sinew and jagged stone that moved in erratic bursts, almost teleporting between the fissures. Its eyes were molten, reflecting fear and desire in equal measure. Laser gunfire tore through the air, scorching its flesh, but each strike seemed absorbed by some unnatural resilience, leaving Kale with the grim understanding that conventional tactics were insufficient. Power sword in hand, he advanced cautiously, striking only when absolutely certain, the contact jarring against his arm as if he were cutting into something harder than mere flesh. The squad's cohesion allowed them to survive, each soldier a node in a fragile web of awareness and action. Private Hallow's tremors worsened. The constant psychic pressure and relentless predators had begun to erode his focus. Kale barked sharp orders, forcing him to steady his aim and recall his training. "Do not falter, not here, not now." The young soldier's hands shook, yet he obeyed, firing in disciplined bursts, each shot a tether to the reality they struggled to maintain. The predators tested them continuously, probing for weakness, exploiting hesitation, and withdrawing only to return with altered patterns, as if learning from the soldiers' every maneuver. This was not simple hunting. It was a sustained psychological assault, intertwined with the physical threat, designed to exhaust, intimidate, and break the mind before it could falter. As they neared the spire, another wave of creatures appeared, grotesque humanoid forms fused with the landscape itself. Their limbs stretched unnaturally, faces warped into eternal screaming masks, and claws burned with a heat that seemed drawn from the planet's molten veins. Kale's squad responded with disciplined volleys, power sword strikes, and coordinated maneuvers, but the creatures adapted instantly, evading and countering with fluid, almost intelligent motion. Every encounter was a test of reflexes, awareness, and nerves, a reminder that in this world, death was patient, cunning, and unavoidable for the unwary. The spire offered some respite, its interior partially hollowed, with ledges and alcoves that provided cover. Kale ordered the squad inside, taking stock of injuries and ammunition, and setting watches at the few vantage points that offered a clear line of sight. The oppressive heat and noxious fumes still clung to the air, and the predators prowled outside, visible in brief glimpses through fissures and broken walls. Cale could sense their intelligence, the way they anticipated movement, their ability to vanish and reappear as if the very world was conspiring with them. Survival here demanded not only skill, but constant vigilance, a mental calculus of fear and action that left no room for error. By late afternoon, Kyle noted subtle changes in the creature's behavior. They were becoming bolder, coordinating attacks across multiple fronts, pressing the squad in patterns that suggested strategy rather than instinct. The predators were extensions of the world's will, each encounter reinforcing that this was not random violence, but calculated hunting. Cale's mind raced, calculating angles, predicting movements, and relying on the cohesion of his squad to survive each wave. He understood instinctively that the spire was temporary, a waypoint, and that the real test lay in continued movement, adaptation, and the refusal to succumb to terror. As the warped sun dipped below the horizon, the landscape shifted in response to the predator's presence. Shadows lengthened, molten rivers redirected subtly, and fissures opened unexpectedly, each alteration a trap for the unwary. Cale's senses strained under the pressure, yet he maintained command, forcing the squad to advance despite exhaustion, heat, and psychic strain. The predators of flesh had revealed themselves fully, relentless, adaptive, and terrifyingly intelligent. Survival depended on understanding them not as mindless beasts, but as agents of the world's malevolent will, creatures born of nightmare and sharpened by the warp's insidious influence. Night fell over the jagged terrain, the warped sky casting green and purple hues over rocks that seemed to twist under their gaze. The spire offered a tenuous sanctuary, but Cale knew instinctively that predators were circling, testing, probing for weaknesses. The whispers of the broken choir still lingered faintly, threading through the edges of consciousness, a reminder that the mind was as much a battlefield as the terrain itself. Cale's squad was alive, but every soldier carried the invisible weight of exhaustion, fear, and the constant pressure of predation. The first assault came suddenly, shadows coalescing into forms that struck with lightning speed. A monstrous hybrid, its body a fusion of sinew and molten rock, lunged from a fissure, claws blazing with heat. Laser-gun fire erupted in disciplined bursts, scorching flesh that twisted and reformed in impossible ways. Cale leapt forward, power sword slicing with precision, cutting through the warped mass. Yet the creature seemed only slowed, not defeated. Hollow fired again, shaking but determined, and the coordinated assault finally forced the abomination to retreat, leaving a trail of sizzling molten residue. The squad exhaled collectively, knowing this was merely the opening act of a long night. Cale scanned the perimeter, noting movement in multiple directions. Predators stalked the shadows with unnerving intelligence, retreating only to return with altered tactics, forcing the squad to adapt continuously. The terrain itself was a weapon. Fissures opened beneath boots, molten streams shifted, and gravity warped subtly in ways that disoriented even seasoned soldiers. Every step became a negotiation with the world, a careful balance between forward motion and survival. Cale's mind raced, coordinating cover fire, movement, and focus, ensuring that the squad remained cohesive even under the relentless assault. Hours passed in a blur of heat, shadow, and violent contact. The squad's cohesion was tested beyond anything Cale had experienced, each soldier a node in a fragile network of awareness. Private Hollow faltered at one point, nearly losing focus under the psychic pressure and physical exhaustion. Cale grabbed him, forcing attention back to the present. "Anchor yourself," he barked, voice sharp, eyes blazing. "Do not let them pull you into the shadows." Hollow nodded, trembling but steady, and the squad pressed on, determined not merely to survive but to endure, to resist the predatory will that sought to consume them. The predators' tactics grew more sophisticated. Groups coordinated from multiple angles, ambushing from above and below, using the warped terrain to their advantage. Cale realized that this was no simple predation. It was a methodical test, a probing of human endurance and adaptability. Each encounter left scars, on armor, flesh, and mind, but the squad learned, adapted, and survived. The predators were formidable, relentless and intelligent, yet they were not infallible, and Cale relied on his experience, the bond of his soldiers, and unwavering discipline to navigate the gauntlet. By the pre-dawn hours, the immediate threat had diminished slightly, the predators withdrawing into the shadows, observing, waiting for mistakes. Cale surveyed the spire and surrounding terrain, scorched rock, molten fissures, and scattered remains of creatures already slain or driven off. The squad was battered but intact, each member physically and mentally drained yet still standing. This temporary reprieve offered a chance to regroup, tend to minor injuries, and strategize for the next phase. They had survived the night, outlasting predators born of flesh, stone, and the warp's malevolent will. Kyle understood, however, that survival here was provisional. The predators had tested them, adapted to them, and would return, more cunning and relentless. The night had been a lesson in endurance, discipline, and the fragility of human perception. The broken choir, the world itself, and the predators were intertwined, shaping a nightmare that would continue to escalate. Yet in their survival, Kyle saw the faint spark of defiance, a reminder that even in a world designed to erase humanity, resilience and unity could carve a path forward, however narrow, however perilous. The horizon fractured as the squad ascended toward the cratered heart of the world, a gaping maw that pulsed with heat, shadow, and an almost sentient malevolence. Kale moved deliberately, every step measured, boots crunching against blackened rock, his senses stretched taut across sound, vibration, and the subtle hum of the warp. The broken choir was no longer a distant threat. Its whispers clung to their minds, threading into perception, twisting thought into doubt. Here, in the maw of eternity, the world itself seemed to watch, to judge, and to hunger. Survival depended not only on physical endurance, but on the unwavering discipline to distinguish reality from deception. The crater's edge revealed horrors sculpted from molten stone and warped flesh, titanic forms half buried in lava and ash, as if the world had attempted to birth and crush its own monsters simultaneously. Kale noted the scale of devastation, remnants of previous expeditions, vehicles fused into the rock, scorched banners frozen mid-motion. Each relic whispered the same truth. Those who had come before had perished, consumed not merely by creatures but by the very nature of this world. He signaled the squad to hold formation, scanning for movement. Shadows flitted across the terrain, fast and deliberate, testing both courage and perception, while the chorus of whispers shifted, rising in both pitch and cadence, as if mocking their progress. Private Hollow's breathing grew ragged, sweat and ash mixing on his armor. Kale clenched his jaw, knowing that fatigue was as dangerous as any predator. "Steady," he murmured, though his own mind felt the strain of the oppressive environment. The maw of eternity was more than a battlefield. It was a crucible, a test of will and spirit as much as flesh and steel. Lava rivers pulsed and shifted unpredictably. Fissures opened without warning, and gravity twisted subtly, throwing off every calculation of movement. Even the weapons felt inadequate, laser guns struggling against creatures and constructs shaped by forces beyond comprehension. As they descended, the scale of the maw became apparent. Towering forms, some vaguely humanoid, others indescribable, rose from molten rivers, skeletal and yet animated with intelligence. The predators of flesh and shadow had multiplied, each encounter more elaborate, coordinated, and disorienting than the last. Kale's squad pressed on, firing in disciplined volleys, striking only when patterns of movement aligned, each moment a negotiation with survival. The world seemed to respond dynamically, fissures shifting beneath feet, molten veins redirecting to block paths, as if the terrain itself conspired with the predators to test them to their utmost limits. Amid the chaos, Kyle glimpsed fragments of psychic activity, echoes of psychers who had fallen, their final thoughts lingering like smoke in the air. Some fragments whispered warnings, others screamed in eternal torment. The chorus intertwined with these echoes, producing an auditory assault that pressed upon the mind as fiercely as the predators pressed upon flesh. Kale forced himself to concentrate, reminding himself and the squad that perception was malleable here, and that succumbing to illusion was as lethal as any claw or weapon. Every footstep was calculated, every glance disciplined, and yet the oppressive nature of the maw threatened to unravel even the most rigorous training. They reached a ridge overlooking a molten expanse, a lake of promethium-like substance, where the horizon seemed to fold inward, giving the sense of endless depth. Kale felt the tug of the warp intensify, subtle at first, then undeniable, a pressure at the edges of cognition that whispered of eternity, of worlds within worlds, and of the insignificance of flesh in the face of an unending cosmos. Here the predators were not merely hunting. The world itself was awake, responsive, and patient, a living cathedral of torment. Survival demanded focus, unity, and a refusal to surrender to despair, for in the maw of eternity, even the smallest lapse could be fatal, and the distinction between hunter and hunted had begun to blur beyond recognition. The squad descended cautiously along a narrow ledge, the heat of molten rivers below licking the soles of their boots, threatening to consume any misstep. The shadows of towering forms shifted with every flicker of light, casting illusions that bent reality itself. Cale kept his lasgun raised, eyes scanning the horizon, aware that the predators, both of flesh and of the warp's design, were testing their limits. Every movement seemed anticipated, every breath measured, every twitch of muscle observed. Here, discipline and unity were their only shields against an environment that sought to erode both body and mind. The whispers intensified, no longer subtle threads in the air but a cacophony pressing against thought, twisting memories and fear into a tangible weight. Some soldiers flinched involuntarily, eyes darting to shapes that were not there, yet seemed to linger at the edge of perception. Cale's voice cut through the haze, firm, unyielding, an anchor in the psychic storm. Focus, hold formation, trust each other, and trust what is real. The squad moved as a single entity, each soldier synchronizing breath and step, their survival dependent on shared awareness and unbroken resolve. The Maw's horrors tested their cohesion with every heartbeat, yet their unity remained intact, fragile but unyielding. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. From fissures erupted twisted forms, skeletal yet muscular, each movement unnaturally precise, eyes glowing with malevolence and intelligence. They advanced with purpose, coordinating attacks in ways that defied instinct, probing for gaps in formation and hesitation in the mind. Cale responded with a disciplined torrent of fire, last rounds carving streaks of light through the haze, while his power sword met the closest predator with a metallic screech that echoed across the molten expanse. The creatures recoiled briefly only to reform, more cunning and adaptive, each assault a challenge to both skill and sanity. Private Hallow staggered, nearly tripping over a fissure, and Cale's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder to steady him. The young soldier's eyes flickered with panic, but Cale's presence and command anchored him. "You are here. You are alive. Move with us, not against us," he said, voice steady yet sharp, cutting through the chaos. Around them, the squad pressed forward, adapting instinctively to the evolving threats. Every predator encounter was an exercise in observation and reaction, a test of perception that pushed them to the brink of exhaustion. Survival demanded clarity of thought, for a single lapse could mean death or madness. The Maw's interior revealed twisted landscapes that defied natural law. Rivers of molten promethium-like substance flowed upward. Jagged spires rotated in impossible angles, and gravity itself shifted subtly, throwing off every instinctive calculation. Cale observed patterns in these distortions, noting subtle consistencies that allowed him to predict predator movement and environmental shifts. The squad responded in kind, navigating the warped terrain with a combination of instinct, observation, and rigid coordination. Here, adaptation was not merely advantageous, it was the difference between life and oblivion. By late afternoon, the immediate threats had slowed, predators retreating into fissures and shadows, their movements deliberate, measured, almost ritualistic. Cale's squad paused at a plateau, surveying the molten expanse, their bodies battered, armor scorched, and nerves stretched taut. The Maw of Eternity was not merely a battlefield, but a crucible of perception, endurance, and will. Each member carried the psychic residue of the choir and the tangible scars of combat, yet none had broken. Cale recognized that their survival thus far was as much a victory of mind as of muscle, an assertion of humanity against forces designed to unmake it. In the faint glow of the molten horizon, Cale noted something unsettling, traces of movement that were neither predator nor soldier, patterns suggesting intelligence beyond even the warped creatures they had encountered. The Maw was alive, but in subtle ways hinted at consciousness, awareness, perhaps even design. It was a place of patience, observation, and testing, where survival demanded constant vigilance, adaptation, and an understanding that the world itself was an adversary as formidable as any flesh-bound creature. The squad had endured, yet Cale knew instinctively that the deeper they moved, the more the Maw's true nature would reveal itself, challenging every assumption of reality, strategy, and survival. Night fell with unnatural swiftness, folding the molten landscape into shadow, while the faint green glow of the fissures cast distorted shapes across the squad's path. Cale led them forward, aware that the predators in the warped environment would exploit every moment of fatigue. The air hummed with the lingering resonance of the broken choir, though it was quieter here, more like a deep vibration pressing against the bones. Even the bravest soldiers moved cautiously. Every sense stretched to the breaking point, aware that the maw tested mind, body, and perception simultaneously. The predators emerged again, in forms both familiar and alien, stalking along ledges and fissures. Their movements fluid, deliberate, almost intelligent. Some resembled twisted orcs, others hybrid abominations of flesh and molten stone. Yet all shared a malevolent purpose. Laser fire erupted in disciplined volleys, cutting through shadows and molten haze, while Kale's power sword met the closest attacker with calculated precision. Each strike revealed both strength and adaptability. Wounds healed unnaturally, bodies reformed, and intelligence guided every movement. Survival demanded a synergy of skill, observation, and the will to resist panic. Private Hallow flinched at a shadow moving in the corner of his vision, his mind fraying under psychic and physical strain. Kale placed a steady hand on his shoulder, forcing eye contact. Anchor yourself. Focus on what is real, not what whispers at the edge of your mind. The young soldier nodded, trembling but determined, firing at the nearest threat. The squad responded in unison, a cohesive unit against a world designed to fracture cohesion and exploit doubt. Every encounter was a duel of perception as much as combat, a test of the human mind against entities that thrived on terror and uncertainty. The maw's terrain shifted subtly, lava flows redirecting, fissures opening without warning, and gravity pulling at uneven angles. Kale observed patterns in these distortions, noting consistency amid chaos, and adjusted the squad's movement accordingly. The predators exploited these shifts, using elevation and perception to their advantage, probing for hesitation, and pressing attacks with methodical intelligence. Each successful maneuver reinforced the squad's resilience, their ability to adapt to the unpredictable and the impossible. Survival was no longer a matter of courage alone, but of constant awareness, discipline, and trust in one another. Hours of relentless pressure gave way to brief reprieve as the predators withdrew to observe. Retreating into fissures and molten shadows, the squad paused on a jagged ledge, surveying the expanse below. Rivers of molten promethium-like substance, twisted spires rising and rotating in impossible angles, and remnants of previous expeditions frozen in molten ash. Kale noted the subtle signs of psychic interference lingering in the air, the faint echoes of the broken choir blending with memories trapped in the terrain. The maw was alive, aware and patient, a crucible that demanded endurance beyond physicality alone. Kale gathered the squad, noting exhaustion in their movements, haunted eyes, and trembling hands. We endure because we must. The maw will test us again, but we are still alive. Hold to each other, hold to reality, and the predator's patience will be our guide to survival. The soldiers nodded, silent but resolute, understanding that endurance was victory here. In the maw of eternity, survival was provisional, hard-won, and contingent upon unwavering discipline, perception, and unity. Yet even amidst the horrors, Kale recognized the faint spark of defiance, the ember of human will that persisted against a world that sought only to consume it. As night deepened, the molten horizon cast long shadows over the squad, the predator's eyes glinting briefly in reflection. Kyle set watch rotations, ensuring that vigilance remained unbroken. The Maw of Eternity was more than a battlefield. It was a living adversary, patient and intelligent, testing the limits of mind, body, and spirit. The squad had endured, adapted, and survived thus far, yet the trials ahead promised escalation, deeper horrors, and challenges that would push every concept of reality to its edge. And Kale understood with unshakable clarity, here in this unending crucible, humanity's persistence was both fragile and defiant, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. Dawn, or what passed for it on this demon world, filtered through the twisted sky, bathing the jagged landscape in a sickly green glow. Kale surveyed the horizon from a precarious ledge, the molten rivers below reflecting fractured light like pools of molten glass. The predators had receded into shadow, leaving only faint echoes of movement and the lingering resonance of the broken choir, a persistent hum threading through the edges of perception. Yet something deeper had shifted. The world itself seemed aware of them, responding not merely with predators, but with phenomena that challenged the very structure of reality. Whispers rose faintly in the air, not simply the choir but the fragmented memories of psychers, soldiers and explorers long dead, trapped in the warp-touched fabric of the planet. They spoke in tones both pleading and commanding, fragments of prayers, curses, and distorted visions. Kale's mind strained to filter signal from noise, to tether himself and his squad to what was real. Every soldier felt the subtle pull of suggestion, the weight of perception bending toward despair, yet Kale's presence acted as an anchor. In this place, survival was no longer a matter of firepower or tactics alone. It demanded clarity, discipline, and the ability to interpret fragments of truth within a living nightmare. The maw's scale revealed new horrors as they moved closer to its center. Jagged spires twisted impossibly, their angles defying natural law, while molten flows carved rivers in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. Within this crucible, Kale glimpsed structures that hinted at intelligence beyond the immediate predators, monolithic forms, partially fused with rock and lava, engraved with sigils of human and alien origin alike. Rumors whispered among the soldiers suggested the presence of demon engines or the remnants of corrupted Adeptus Mechanicus experiments, yet Kale knew better than to accept conjecture as fact. The world itself was a predator, a cunning and patient adversary that blurred the line between matter, perception, and will. Private Hollow shivered, eyes fixed on a distant spire, where shadow and molten light coalesced into vaguely humanoid forms. "Sergeant, are they thinking?" he asked, voice trembling. Kale's response was measured, precise. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the world speaks in forms we can only interpret. Either way, they are aware, and we must respect that awareness." Each soldier realized that even observation was dangerous. Lingering too long, scrutinizing too closely, invited the world's attention and the subtle manipulations of perception that could fracture the mind. The maw was patient, and time was a weapon as deadly as any claw or laser gun. They advanced cautiously, the terrain shifting beneath them as if alive. Lava flows altered subtly, fissures opened without warning, and gravity pulled at impossible angles, challenging every instinct honed through decades of service. Kale guided the squad with meticulous care, interpreting subtle cues in the environment and predator behavior, seeking patterns that would allow them to navigate without succumbing to despair or ambush. The squad moved as one, a fragile yet determined unity against a reality that sought to unmake them at every step. At the center of the maw, Kale glimpsed something unnerving, a pulsating, semi-formed structure that seemed to breathe, its surface shifting between flesh, stone, and molten rock. Rumors surged through the squad, unspoken and speculative, perhaps a demon lord's anchor, a psychic focal point, or a relic of a lost Mechanicus experiment, but none could be confirmed. The sight struck them not with fear of immediate attack, but with the unsettling awareness that the world itself possessed agency, patience, and intelligence. To survive here required not only courage and skill, but the recognition that the planet, the predators, and the choir were components of a single, coherent, malevolent force. Kale took a deep breath, grounding himself in the discipline that had carried them this far. The Maw's center was not just a goal or waypoint, it was a threshold, a place where physical threat, psychic resonance, and metaphysical implications converged. Every decision, every movement demanded focus, resilience, and trust in one another. The squad's survival thus far had been provisional, yet the ember of defiance persisted. Here, amidst impossible geometry, sentient terrain, and the whispers of eternity, humanity clung stubbornly to existence, a fragile yet unyielding testament to willpower in a universe that sought to consume it. The air thickened as they approached the Maw's central pulse, the heat of molten rivers mingling with the acrid scent of brimstone and warped metal. Shadows danced unnaturally across the terrain, merging with faint echoes of movement, creating an environment where every perception was suspect. Kale felt the subtle tug at the edges of his mind, a psychic pressure that was almost sentient, testing his focus, exploiting doubt. The broken choir had become a subdued but constant undercurrent, threading through their thoughts, shaping fear into a tangible presence. Survival demanded more than discipline now. It demanded absolute mastery over perception itself. Creatures emerged intermittently from fissures and molten flows, each a grotesque hybrid of flesh, stone, and warp-touched energy. They moved with intelligence, avoiding direct confrontation until tactical advantage was assured. Kale directed the squad in coordinated volleys, laser guns and power sword strikes executed with precision honed by exhaustion and necessity. Each strike was a negotiation with the world's will, a measured assertion of existence in a place designed to erase it. Every creature felled was only a temporary reprieve. The Maw adapted, learning and testing again with relentless patience. As they neared the pulsating core, Kale observed shapes within the molten crucible that defied immediate understanding. Fragments of Psyker's gear fused with the rock, sigils of unknown origin etched into molten veins, and silhouettes that suggested intelligence without confirming it. Rumors among the squad whispered of demon engines, corrupted mechanicus constructs, or entities older than memory itself. Kale neither confirmed nor denied. The world offered no certainties, only interpretations filtered through terror, observation, and survival instinct. Each step demanded absolute focus, for error here could unravel not only the body, but the mind. Private Hollow faltered briefly, eyes fixed on a writhing shadow that seemed to echo a memory of a fallen comrade. Kale placed a firm hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Reality is what we anchor it to. Focus on the living, the tangible. The rest is noise, he said. Hollow's breathing steadied, and he followed the squad's careful advance. The Maw tested their perception relentlessly, interweaving memory, fear, and illusion, forcing each soldier to constantly reassert what was real. Even seasoned veterans admitted to fleeting doubts, subtle tremors of panic that threatened cohesion. Kale's command became as much about mental anchoring as tactical direction. At the core, a vast formation pulsed rhythmically, molten and semi-flesh, exuding an energy that pressed against the mind. Whispers, both familiar and alien, harmonized into an overwhelming resonance, threading through memory, instinct, and fear. Kale sensed that the Maw itself was alive, aware of each thought, measuring resolve and waiting to exploit the slightest lapse. Yet within that pressure he found clarity. Survival was not a matter of confrontation but of endurance, observation, and unity. The squad's cohesion, their shared focus, and the discipline that had carried them thus far were their shields against total annihilation. They paused at a safe distance, weapons raised but unused, absorbing the enormity of the entity before them. It was neither wholly alive nor completely constructed. It existed at a threshold between reality and the warp, a living anchor of the Maw's malevolent intelligence. Kale's heart pounded not from fear alone, but from the recognition of scale. This was no mere battlefield. This was a crucible of cognition, perception, and willpower. Humanity had endured here against predators, impossible terrain, and the broken choir. Yet the Maw's core represented a challenge beyond flesh, a confrontation with the essence of a world designed to consume, reshape, and dominate everything within its influence. Kale's voice broke the tense silence, quiet yet firm, guiding the squad through the final stretch of observation and preparation. We endure, we adapt, we anchor ourselves in what we are and what we know. This is the test. The Maw itself watches, but we are still alive. The soldiers nodded, silent but resolute, each aware that their survival hinged on perception, discipline, and unity. Beyond the molten walls, the whispers rose again, harmonizing with the pulse of the core, an eternal reminder that in this demon world, reality was fluid, threats were endless, and defiance, however fragile, was humanity's only weapon. The squad advanced cautiously toward the pulsating core, the air vibrating with a resonance that seemed almost alive, pressing against thought and nerve alike. Shadows elongated and twisted, forming grotesque shapes that threatened to deceive perception itself. Carl felt the subtle tug of the warp, a persistent sentient pressure seeking to unravel resolve. Each soldier tightened focus, anchoring themselves to the tangible. The weight of armor, the rhythm of breath, the sting of scorched air on skin. In this place, reality was a fragile construct, and clinging to it was the first act of defiance. Creatures of flesh, stone, and molten distortion emerged in sporadic bursts, testing their movement and cohesion. They advanced with intelligent patience, never reckless, always measuring response, probing for hesitation. Kale directed disciplined volleys of lasfire, cutting paths through the unpredictable battlefield, while his power sword met the nearest threat with precise strikes that combined human skill with sheer willpower. Every encounter was a negotiation with the world's malevolent design, a battle not just of survival but of mental resilience, a test of how far the mind could stretch before snapping under relentless pressure. As they neared the core, Kale observed subtle anomalies in the environment, molten veins that pulsed like arteries, sigils that shifted under the eye, and echoes of psychic energy that hinted at intelligence beyond comprehension. Rumors among the squad whispered of demon lords, mechanicus abominations, or remnants of previous expeditions, yet none dared to voice certainty. Kale understood instinctively that knowledge here was always provisional, perception the truest measure of survival. The Maw's core did not merely challenge flesh, it challenged understanding, intent, and the very perception of reality. Private Hallow faltered at the edge of a fissure, eyes drawn to a shape that resembled a comrade lost long ago, yet distorted, unrecognizable. Kale steadied him with a firm hand, voice low but resolute. Do not let memory become the predator. Anchor to the living, to each other, and to what we know. Hallow inhaled deeply, grounding himself, and the squad pressed onward as a single unit. The bond between them their only certainty in a world designed to deceive and consume. Every movement was deliberate, every glance disciplined, and every decision weighted by the understanding that even a single lapse could be fatal. Finally, they reached the edge of the core itself, a convulsion of molten flesh, stone, and warp energy. It pulsed rhythmically, as if breathing, sending waves of pressure through both mind and body. The broken choir harmonized faintly with the core's pulse, a symphony of whispers that suggested awareness, intelligence, and judgment. Kale realized that this was no mere battlefield. It was a crucible of cognition, perception, and will. Survival required understanding that confrontation here was not physical alone. It demanded resilience, unity, and the unyielding refusal to succumb to the world's malevolent design. The squad paused, weapons raised but not fired, facing the impossible form before them. Kale's gaze swept across the soldiers' exhausted yet determined faces. They had endured predators, twisted terrain, and the insidious pull of the broken choir. They had survived each test, adapted to every challenge, and maintained cohesion against forces designed to erase them. Now, standing before the Maw's heart, they understood the true nature of survival here. It was defiance in the face of omnipresent malevolence, a testament to unity, discipline, and human will. Kyle drew a steady breath, voice cutting through the psychic tension. We endure. We adapt, we remain. The Maw may watch, the predators may stalk, and the whispers may seek to fracture us, but we are still here, alive, aware, and defiant. The soldiers echoed his resolve in quiet affirmation, anchoring themselves to reality, to one another, and to the fragile ember of humanity that refused to be consumed. Beyond the molten shadows, the whispers harmonized with the pulse of the core, a reminder that in this unending nightmare, defiance, however small, was the victory of the mind and spirit against the infinite void.